Citations gaming enthusiasts, ShortofMyNerd here, bringing you another once-in-a-blue-moon video that has nothing to do with Mario. I recently went on a 2-week-long holiday to the Lake District, and between the shopping, walks through beautiful countryside, dreadful hay fever, and trips to nice pubs with my dad, I played through a new game, Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore. And even though I also played through some of the acclaimed indie game Sea of Stars for the first time, and began another playthrough of literally my favourite Switch game Octopath Traveler 2, it was Arzette that I had by far the most fun with on the holiday, which is surprising, given the infamy of the games Arzette is a spiritual successor to. The Jewel of Faramore is a game inspired by the widely memed on, largely hated Zelda Philips CDI games. I've never played any of them myself, but I remember hearing from some PBG videos years ago that they had many awful gameplay quirks that made them painfully unfun. But the thing about the games that stood out most to me in my memory were the divisive, extremely goofy cutscenes. PBG seems to hate them and made fun of them a lot, but I always found them very charming and hilarious. Sometimes from actual jokes, sometimes because they actually were comically terrible and occasionally a little uncomfortable. So when I saw the trailer for a spiritual successor to those games, I was really tickled by the very idea someone was doing this, and honestly, the game appealed to me right away. I love the concept of someone seeing a bad game that executed its ideas poorly to the point of being well known as what not to do in game design, and saying to themselves, I can fix it. And boy, did they fix it. Real quickly before I get to the gameplay meat of this video, let's go over the visuals and music. The cutscenes in Arzette are a delight. They recapture the essence of the ones in those Zelda games well, while also just being really well animated and often extremely funny. Though I will say people with an active cringe complex will probably struggle to enjoy them. To that I say, kill the part of you that cringes. Life is honestly way more fun that way. I laughed at the cutscenes a lot during my playthrough. The bits, jokes, character expressions, and general goofiness are all on point and extremely charming, with a great colourful cast of lovable and hateable characters that I'll talk about a little more when I get to the story part of the video. I do feel sorry for Arzette with the sheer number of times all the characters invade her personal space though. I feel represented in her looks of discomfort as people pop her space bubble because I'm like that too. But even outside of the cutscenes, I love how this game looks. The overworld sprites and animations are also very appealing and well made, especially Arzette herself and some of the bosses. But I also adore the sort of painting style of the level environments themselves. Some genuinely gorgeous looking backgrounds that give this game such a distinct retro sort of look. I really vibe with these backgrounds. They honestly remind me somewhat of the ones in Wario Land Shake Dimension sometimes, and trust me when I say that is high praise. Apparently the way the platforms and background looked in the CDI games was a major problem because you couldn't tell what was a platform or exactly where their edges were. But I must say that almost never happened to me in this game. They obviously put a lot of care into making sure players knew what they could jump on. I got it wrong a couple of times through the game, but it was mostly very clear. This isn't a review, but if it were, I'd give this game a 5 out of 6 for visuals. It's not one of the best looking games I've ever seen, but I've got so little negative to say about how it looks. The music is also a huge bop. Some tunes having outrageously funky feels like Durridin Forest and Bonjale Crypts. With Durridin especially, it was a great idea to get the player hyped to play right from the first level. Some with chill or cozy vibes like with Crease Canyon and Faramore Town respectively. I love Faramore Town as a hub so much you guys, it's a pleasure to return to every time. The music really makes it feel safe and comfortable, which is apparently another big step up from the CDI games. Who makes a hub town with infinitely spawning enemies? This game's music and visuals come together really effectively to create a comfortable retro feel, eliciting feelings of nostalgia in me for this game I just played a couple weeks ago in my late 20s. It's a little annoying that the music cuts out when you talk to people, but the funny dialogue makes up for it, and you're only deprived of music for about a minute before you can resume the good vibes. Take notes, Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. This is the only amount of time without music I find somewhat acceptable. Anyway, the music in this game was excellent, and I actually listened to the soundtrack a lot on my walks on holiday, and I've added it to my various playlists on Spotify. Button Masher did a great job. 5 out of 6. No, this still isn't a review. What makes you think that? On to the gameplay and mechanics! The meat of the game and this review, I mean quick little opinion video. For starters, Arzette feels good to play, but she only gets better and better as the game progresses and you unlock new attacks and movement options. The game starts off feeling quite tough, with even the enemies in the first level feeling plenty difficult when I started playing. One of the first things I noticed about this game's structure is that it requires you to return to old levels a lot. Throughout the whole game, you're constantly gaining new abilities and attacks and whatnot, and those always open up a bunch of new areas in old levels you were previously unable to access. At first, this worried me because that sounds really repetitive and annoying, but astonishingly, this game pulls it off. Each time I had to return to old locations, the game had become substantially different feeling enough through all the new abilities I'd gotten. Playing those old levels felt fresh and different. And even though a lot of the time it's not clear which old levels you should be revisiting, so you end up kinda aimlessly wandering between random ones, it's always worth it for all the new stuff you discover by accident when you do. Even if you don't discover a new key item in a level or something of similar value, you're almost certain to at least come across one or two new candles, which open up even more new paths, making backtracking never feel like a waste of time. These levels are all quite dense with things to discover, and it's very satisfying to go back to places and finally be able to access an area that was previously blocked off. Or it's just fun to go back and be able to now defeat an enemy or overcome an obstacle easily with your new abilities when before you had to struggle against it. Jeez, these projectile enemies are so annoying to deal with. Later. A barrier for projectiles? Ugh, there's so many things that are only just out of reach, and sometimes doing this platforming is a little too difficult. Later.
A double jump? This changes everything!
It almost never feels tedious returning to old levels. The new abilities made me want to go back and play them again. Sometimes finding new stuff was secondary to how liberating it felt just to run through the early to mid levels with my new abilities that make me OP there now. Does this game count as a Metroidvania? I've never played one before, but this seems to me what a Metroidvania should feel like. But what's the difficulty curve like? This game doesn't have that many enemy types, though you do encounter a few new and tougher ones as you progress. They all end up easy to deal with given all the abilities you get, at least on a one or two at a time basis. Though I just want to quickly bring up these little endlessly spawning gnat-like enemies. There were similar enemies in the CDI games which came from off screen and never stopped. Now though, they only come from one direction because they have a nest you can destroy. Far less annoying. Of course, the earlier levels become easy once you return to them later, but in the furthest levels you currently have access to at any given point, the difficulty usually stays at around the same rather hard level, even getting more difficult despite you getting stronger. The platforming gets harder, the enemy placements get tougher to deal with, but most of all, in the late game, there's several areas with hordes of enemies just completely surrounding you. You may now have all the tools needed to defeat everything, but now it's a matter of being really aware of your surroundings, using all your abilities at the right moments, and having quick reaction times to combat the swarm. It's also just really fun using your arsenal of attacks. The ray gun is very fun in particular, and I was very pleased to discover bombs can one-hit KO pretty much anything, but since they're expensive, you've obviously got to pick the right moments to use them, as well as the rest of your resources. This game is fun on so many layers. All in all, this game keeps you at around the same level of satisfying difficulty as you progress, gain abilities, and get better at playing it. And death never feels like a huge setback because the game is generous enough at checkpoints at the start of every new room, and fast load times when coming back. I've said loads of times in the past that I love when games make death or failure not feel like a big deal. I always appreciate when a game just lets you hop right back in a moment later. The only part of the game that I'd say gets too easy are the bosses. Especially when you unlock the barrier that reflects projectiles. There are several late game bosses you can trivialize by activating it and standing still. Even Daimer isn't that hard to beat. His fight felt too short to me as the final boss. What was there was very fun, just should have lasted a lot longer in my opinion. Another problem the CDI games apparently had was their economy, and the enemy grinding for rubies it required. This game also has a lot of useful resources that you need to buy from the shop, and the rubies are still mostly, though not entirely, earned by defeating enemies. Side note, I think it's funny how the currency being called rubies and the amounts their colours are worth was just incorrect in the CDI games, but now this is a separate franchise, it's okay and a funny reference. No longer the result of people not caring enough to get things right, it's now something purposeful and done because the designers do care. Anyways, this is not the kind of game where grinding would be very fun, so thankfully I just always passively collected all the rubies I needed through normal gameplay. You can't even hold that many until you unlock the wallet upgrade. This game was extremely fun for me from start to finish. I'm keen to complete it at some point, and I'm already excited at the prospect of playing through it again. I imagine it's a very different experience on repeat playthroughs when you know where everything is, so you can work on gathering the things you need in a more efficient order. Kinda similar to how Sticker Star is on repeat playthroughs. When you know where the things you need are and when to use them, progression is less of a faff, but discovering them on your own in your first playthrough still feels rewarding, at least if you're a patient gamer like myself. That's right, I snuck Paper Mario Sticker Star praise into my Arzette video, deal with it. If, hypothetically, this were a review video, which it's not, what score would I give the gameplay, overall level design, and whatnot? Well, of the few games I've reviewed, the first Mario vs. Donkey Kong is the closest to Arzette in genre style, and I gave that a 9 out of 12. But they're still very different, and the reason I don't make reviews very often, and why this isn't a review, is because I don't like taking subjective things I like and trying to apply scores to reflect their quality. I'm bad at it. I don't like doing it. Here I'm on the fence between an 8 and a 9, maybe a 10 if I'm being generous. I can't be bothered to lock in here. The game is good and very fun. Play it and decide for yourselves. I recommend it. Isn't that really what you look for in a review? Not that this is a review. I might as well briefly touch on this game's story to finish this whatever it is video off. Spoilers ahead, of course. I really like Arzette as a character. She's got a good head on her shoulders and doesn't take any guff. She's usually very kind and helpful to the people she meets, but has some great moments when she realizes more aggression is needed. I love her scene with the racist mayor, it's so good and makes clever use of the whole smart sword that doesn't hurt friendly people concept. About a third of the way through the game, her father dies, and I must admit I cried a little. This sets Arzette on the warpath, and leads to a twist I really like. Despite the royal advisor telling her the whole game to trap Daima in this book, like they did last time, she decides he's too much trouble to be kept around, and has the Jewel of Faramore put into her sword instead. She kills Daima and the twice traitorous Duke Nadelki, who is a creative reference to the traitor guy in the second CDI game. Both were shown mercy and given janitorial jobs, but this guy is a repeat offender, so Arzie does away with him too. Friggin' Nadelki. He has a stupid name. But I like this writing. I like when main characters have agency in the story and they don't just do what they're told. After defeating Daima, Arzette is about to be crowned queen, but decides instead to abolish the monarchy. I suppose this might be an interesting setup for the next game, and sort of comes from her established lack of desire to lead the nation, but I don't know, it still seems a bit random to me, a bit sudden, without enough build-up. I wish more was said about her reasons for making such a big change, though I must say, this does have me curious about how it'll affect the plot of the next game. Oh yeah, and Dale exists. He's the Link stand-in, he's just kinda there. He's annoying, but it's funny to see everyone reacting to his annoyance. The story is good, the joke's funny, and the characters are likeable, with Dale, Nadelki, and this creepy old man being the exceptions. This game having about 10,000 times more plot, dialogue, and characters than most of the other things I've reviewed, means I think I should score its story out of 12 instead of 6 like I've started doing with gameplay. An 8 it is! Not that this is a review. Pay no mind to how it seems I put this in my reviews playlist, you're probably just seeing things. Do you find it a touch peculiar that this video's thesis is that Arzette is better than all the Zelda games I've played, yet I haven't mentioned a single one I've played before? Well, sorry, but it's time to admit I've been a bit cheeky. While I have technically played a few Zelda games before, all I've done is play a tiny bit of Breath of the Wild, Ocarina 3D, and Minish Cap. Breath of the Wild and Ocarina were an hour or two sessions on a friend's copies, and I do own Minish Cap, but I only got past the first dungeon because I kept reaching bits where I had no idea what to do to progress and kept having to consult a guide, which was annoying. So I stopped playing. I can confidently say that Arzette is at least better than what I played of Minish Cap, if that means anything. So what I say is true, Arzette is the best Zelda-like game I've ever played. Even if that's only true by technicality. Who knows if there are actual other Zelda games I'd like more, if I were to play more than a tiny amount of them. I do plan on getting that new one where you play as Zelda. I'll let you know what I think of it when I've played it. But for now, I think it's very funny that this is the first Zelda-adjacent game I've played, and it's a CDI spiritual successor. So, if this was a review, its total score would come to a total of around 27 out of a possible 36. If this were a review, which it obviously isn't, this game is a true indie gem, For me, it was an absolute delight. It took what was a couple of obscure, apparently dreadful games and adapted them into something genuinely fun and worthwhile, and I think that's beautiful. Then again, I can't set A as the jump button, so this game is literally unplayable. 0 points.